My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today I want to do a review and a little bit of an assessment on a video by a psychologist. Her name is Dr. Shefali. I was given this video to me by one of my clients, and so I thought it was a great video. Dr. Shafali is going to answer the question, why do so many women struggle with creating boundaries? I think that's a great question. I think in our society today, being that we are entering into a very oppositional, narcissistic society, I think that being able to create boundaries is going to be very important for a lot of people. So what I want to do today, here's my game plan. Because her question is that she's going to answer, why, I'm reading it off of this computer here, why do so many women struggle with creating boundaries? I'm going to change it to make it a little bit more inclusive because I think men have trouble in this area as well. So I'm going to answer the question, why do human beings, why do people have difficulty creating boundaries? And then I want to conceptualize the problem and I want to give my answer to the question. I want to put that right up front. In full disclosure, I like Dr. Shefali's work a lot. In this instance, though, her answer, and I think she's on a show, so they just took a piece of it. It's only about 4.5 minutes long. So because of that, there's no way that you can fully answer this question because it's a very intricate, complex question. So I think I'm going to have to add a little bit more nuance and clarity to it and make it a little bit more comprehensive. Plus, I do want to put my own point of view in this as well. Let's start off in the beginning. I want to tell you where I feel that she stands because she's going to mention it a little bit, but I want to sum it up, and then I want to sum up what I want to say, and then of course, we'll listen to the video. So Dr. Shefali believes why women have difficulty creating boundaries. It's because women tend to be a product and a victim of our society and our culture, no matter which culture that may be. So that kind of informs your decision making. Number two, she says that you're not honoring your true or authentic self when you don't create boundaries. And because a lot of women have difficulty being authentic and honoring themselves because they do put people in front of them, what happens is they're going to have difficulty making boundaries. She also believes that you don't love yourself enough or you don't know your full worth if you're not making boundaries. So if you were to love yourself more, you would probably create more boundaries. And we'll go over that a little bit more. Of course, I don't have any problem with that. I agree with that. But I want to fill out this answer a little bit more. So here are some of my answers of why men and women have difficulty creating boundaries. Number one, I don't think that we can just push biology to the side. I know that people don't like to talk about that men and women are born different a little bit, and I get that in some ways. But we do have to take a look at the reality. If we go by gender norms, we tend to see females as being a little bit more submissive, a little bit more, say, sensitive, and a little bit more towards caring about emotions. And when we look at men, we tend to see a little bit more aggression. Now, how does this affect boundaries? Well, if you are a little bit more towards the submissive side and always trying to cooperate with people, you are naturally not going to be making strong boundaries because you're trying to cooperate with another human being. So you kind of fawn and you allow other people's opinions and thoughts and feelings and behaviors to kind of run over you a little bit. And I believe, nature is very, very strong in this area. Now, when we're looking at males, we're looking at a couple of things. They can create very rigid boundaries. In other words, they don't want their emotions to show. So they create that boundary, and they don't really want to be too involved or be affected by other people's emotions. So they tend to be a little bit more on the colder side. Again, not everybody, but we're dealing with gender norms. So they create boundaries that way. On the flip side of that, when we're dealing with a person who may be a little bit more aggressive, they tend to burst through or run through other people's boundaries. And this is where it can get really difficult. Because if we look at your gender norm woman, who has difficulty making boundaries, and we have a gender norm man who breaks people's boundaries, this could be very negative towards abusive and catastrophic. So that's why I think it's worth looking at for both genders. Very important. Again, I think that's enough on that. Although I do know some people have a lot of difficulty trying to understand that biology does have a play in this. So let's move on from that. Number two, I do believe that culture, just like Dr. Shefali said, is a massive determinant in whether somebody's going to be able to create boundaries or not. And you're born into this. So a lot of the things that people do that they believe are conscious are relatively unconscious because you were born into it. Now, if we look at what society looks at and says that you are good at, right? How does society value you? For women, it tends to be that they're valued as caregivers, nurturers, being supportive of other people, acquiescing and let somebody else moving forward. Now, society rewards women for that greatly. Now, on the other side, men are rewarded for being protectors and providers. And this also makes difficulty with boundaries. Now, on women, obviously, if you're the caregivers and supporters, your superpower is going to be that maybe you don't have boundaries because you're taking care of everybody else. On the other hand, with men, you have a hero complex where you don't care about the boundaries to your own body. You know, I think about 97% of deaths that happen on the job happen to men. And they choose this. You know, this is of their own volition. You know, we're talking about military, police, firemen, even in sports. I mean, I remember this as growing up. Like, I did not want to appear to be a loser or to be submissive in any way, shape, or form. So I was ready and willing to hit somebody as hard as I could in football with no thought of having a concussion or breaking my neck. I honestly didn't care. I just wanted to be successful. And whatever society said to do, I was willing to do because I wanted to be a hero. I wanted to be put on a pedestal. I wanted society to think I was good. And so, again, culture plays a huge part in boundaries. So number 3 on my list, I think we have to look at the big 5 personality traits. Now, of course, big 5, there's 5. But I'm not going to go over that today because that's a whole nother show. But let's look at 2 of them. Conscientiousness and agreeableness. If you are super traded, now I'm talking about here that this is nature. This is how you're born. So if you are born with the traits or very highly traded for being agreeable with people, trying to cooperate, you are going to probably have difficulty making boundaries with people. Now, if you are incredibly conscientious, again, you're born with that. I mean, things change throughout life a little bit, but basically it's your personality. You're going to want to be achievement striving. You're going to try to want to do the right thing all the time. You're going to be overly responsible, not just for yourself, but for some other people. So if you're in a marriage, you're probably willing to take a lot of things that somebody else would tell you not to, right? You may not run away and just quit. You are going to keep pushing. And conscientiousness is correlated to success in life. So again, if you believe that conscientiousness equals success, and it does most of the time, if you're in a relationship, you're going to keep pushing no matter what, because you believe that if you work hard enough, good things will happen. And again, when you do this, you may destroy a lot of boundaries. You may not have boundaries. You may keep retreating and retreating and retreating because you're still waiting. You're still waiting for it to work, and it may not. The 4th reason why I feel that people have difficulty making boundaries is basic trauma. Now, we're talking about mainly attachment trauma, where you live in a neglectful, inconsistent, invalidating environment. And what does that lead to? It leads to having very few boundaries and being overly responsible for somebody else's emotions and feelings. So if we put those 4 together, in my opinion, those are the big reasons of why someone would have difficulty making boundaries. So let's listen to what Dr. Shefali has to say, even though I took 10 minutes to do that there. All right, here we go.
Hey, Dr. Shefali. Hi. Today's Get Real question is about boundaries. One of my greatest lessons that I've learned from you is how to create boundaries for myself. And I notice that other women seem to struggle with creating boundaries as well. Why is that?
Well, I'm really not the best person to ask, because if there's been any struggle I've really had is creating boundaries. However, let me just
stop it there for a second. Here she's being very modest, which is a facet of being overly agreeable. So I just want to point that out. Because, listen, she's a doctor. I'm sure she knows this subject inside and out, not just professionally, but also in her personal life. And when she says she's not a good person to talk about this, I think she's the perfect person to talk about it for the reason she said, because she has struggled with it. So I think education is incredibly important, but I also think personal experience and then looking at that experience is also very, very important. Let's continue.
Just by saying not all women, I think, have a problem, but it's a particular kind of woman. And I call that woman a super empath, a bleeding empath. And I think you and I are bleeding empaths. And what that really means is that we have no boundaries. And this is where empathy has a dark side to it, where we're loving and we're compassionate and we're forgiving. And, I was raised on meditative practices to be detached and be in the moment. So every moment is a new moment. So let's forget the old transgressions and let's start again. So no boundaries were ever created in my life. So I think that super empathic people need to look at their dark side. And their dark side often is an attachment to a very idealized persona about themselves, that they are eternally compassionate and they're the givers and they're the lovers. And they're so beautiful. It is a beautiful thing to be the givers and the compassionate ones and the forgivers. Yes, but we have to do it within a context that also loves and honors the self. Right? So when we are skewed in our giving, skewed in our compassion, where we're just giving the other, which sounds like heaven, and other people need to learn that, empaths have the opposite problem, that we give so much to the exclusion of the self, that then it's not true giving. Then it's skewed giving, it's pathological giving, it's giving.
Let me stop her right there. She's saying a lot of stuff here, and in a lot of ways we're saying the same things, but we're saying them in different ways. Now, she uses the term super empath. I honestly don't have a problem with that term too much, although the term super empath is not used in psychology. And I know that she knows that. I also think that she has a really good client and fan base that likes that type of terminology. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But it's not a psychological term. It's more of a metaphysical term where we use that when people are talking about like tarot cards and crystals and, astrology and things like that. So I don't have a problem with it, but it's not really getting to the science of it about personality traits. So when she says here that a super empath is one, I'm going to try to get the exact quote. It says they give so much to the exclusion of the self that it's not true giving. I agree with that statement that we can't give of ourselves so much to the exclusion of ourselves. I mean, and she says it's pathological. That's true, and it is. But technically, that's not what empathy is. Empathy is when you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes and try to feel what they feel. It's not about giving of yourself to try to make a situation better at the expense of yourself. The term that we're looking for there is called people pleasing. And the other thing that I have a difficulty with is that, and again, the term super empath, I don't mind. It just depends on how you use it. And I don't mind the way she's using it here. I'm just saying this to, again, fill out this discussion today. A lot of people, when they're told that they're super empaths, they feel that word super, and they think it's a good thing. And they think it's like something that it's like they actually have a superpower that other people don't have. But we're really not looking at the total picture, because from a science point of view, what we're looking at is it's typically a lot more correlated to a trauma response that's known as fawning. And if we look at it as a gift, a super empath as a gift, we may not look at the deeper stuff inside of ourselves that really need to change in order for us to be happy, number one, and number two, to make boundaries. So if we understand it and we conceptualize it as a trauma response of fawning, we can take a look of why that exists. And so I think that is to me, a more comprehensive way to look at this. So let's continue.
To the idealized persona that the empath has, to be the loving one, to be the good one, to be the pleaser, right? So then that's not authentic. They're doing it for the persona. They're not doing it for their authentic self. This was one of my greatest, hardest, still is, lesson in the world, because I thought I was just such a giving, loving person. I didn't realize I was doing it to the detriment of myself because of my lack of worth. So I was feeding a persona that says Shafali is a giver. Shafali is a compassionate person. So she is eternally in that Mother Teresa martyr role. It was a role I was playing. It wasn't authentic. Now that I'm in my worth and I'm giving from more of a place of authenticity, now I'm giving and receiving, right? It's not just this bleeding, empathic giving. Now I can create more boundaries where I feel like I'm being honored as well. And I think this is the lesson for those kinds of women who are these super empathic women who are conditioned to be good, to be pleasing, to be loving, to be eternally the ones who tolerate and have patience. You know, this is a conditioned script of our culture that women need to be like this. And some of us want to be A-grade super achievers at this bleeding empath role that we aspire to portray in the world. So it's time to end the role, cut the bullshit, see it for what it is, that you're just playing to a persona, and really get in touch with your authentic self and get in touch with your worth and expect that you should receive as much as you're giving, not because it's transactional, but...
Let me stop it right there, because there's a tremendous amount of stuff she's saying. I agree that culture has a huge part in if we're able to create boundaries or not, you know, as I stated at the beginning of the show. But one of the things that comes up here is, and I like the way she does this too, she's actually making it this very personal. When I do some of my shows, I believe in drawing emotional blood of the self. I think if you're a therapist, you should be willing to do that and not just talk out of just science. I think you need to have some personal experience in there. And she does that. She does that really well. And she's talking about her experience and that she bought into it with her culture, which is very normal. And this is why I know why she's popular, because she can state the reason. And there's like thousands, if not millions of women who feel the same way. But she has bought it as to say it's her persona. And let's go, just to make sure that we're on the same page, persona means an inauthentic role that is adopted by somebody and it's not their true self. And so she has found that she has adopted an inauthentic role and she has taken on a persona. And that could be true for a lot of people, but I want to ask a different question here to make it more comprehensive. So the question becomes, because she brought this up, does giving at the expense of yourself mean that you have low self-worth? And the honest answer is yes, no, and maybe, because it's different for every person. When we look at people since like the beginning of human civilization, one of the things that's put up front as being a really good person is sacrifice. So in other words, sacrifice seems to be at the heart of all great people, right? And all great stories. As a matter of fact, I mean, I don't know about all religions. I don't. I was brought up Catholic, so I can tell you the Christian religion is based upon the sacrificial nature. Look at the cross. That's a sacrifice. And so that is something to aspire to is to be able to give of yourself, even at the expense of yourself, for the greater good of others. This is what heroes are. The archetype of the hero is to be able to give of yourself, even if it's a little too much, but at least if it's for the greater good, it's okay. She mentions Mother Teresa here, not wanting to be, I think, a martyr like her. I don't know. Maybe Mother Teresa was a martyr. I don't know. But if you were to ask Mother Teresa, do you feel like you gave up too much at the expense of yourself? I don't think she would say that. I think that she felt that she had meaning and purpose, and this was her calling in life to do. And she did a lot of things to help people and lived with like no money. One of my favorite musicians in the 70s, Cat Stevens, gave up all like worldly possessions and all his money at the height of his career. He gave at more, definitely at the expense of himself, to live in poverty. I don't think he did that because of low self-worth. He was on a different mission. So I would say it's different for every person. We look at it in terms of our culture, right? So I'm an American. I see, our culture. I was raised on certain movies. Look at movies like Gladiator, 300, Braveheart, Passion of the Christ, Iron Giant, The Last Samurai, The Notebook. Even romantic comedies, you can see that the leading characters in it give everything. They give more, again, for the greater good. They give for their families. They give for their children. They give for their parents, whatever it might be. And it doesn't necessarily mean low self-worth. Maybe they get their self-worth from being that way. And maybe the culture doesn't give you a persona. Maybe the culture that you're in, you buy into it and you love it. And that's who you are as a person. So I think it skews it a little bit when you talk to people, and let's say someone's in a marriage and they say, I'm going to be married for better or for worse. And you say, well, you're in it for worse because you have low self-worth. I don't know if that's true, or are they incredibly conscientious and they're always trying to do the right thing to save things? So I think all of that is worth talking about. Also, if you're incredibly agreeable, there's a word called altruism, which means that you give without expecting anything in return other than the joy that you get from giving. And there are people like this. So we can't just blanket statements say, if you're having trouble making that boundary, you have low self-worth and you got to fix yourself because you have low self-esteem. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Let's continue. I think there's a little bit more here.
But because you're worthy to live in a context of mutuality. See, bleeding empaths just stew on the side of giving without anything being received. And now that internal balance needs to be put into place. It's all happening on the inside. So the boundary really is not to the outside person.
Let me stop there for a second. If you're giving without any thought of getting anything back, including, let's say, your own joy. Let's say if you are saying yes to things that you don't want to say yes to, and you're saying no to things that you don't want to say no to, you are probably acting out of trauma. People who have a lot of trauma typically do have low self-worth. So I think that's the part that she's missing here, but it's not that she doesn't know it. Again, she's given a quick 4.5-minute answer in the middle of an interview with somebody. So, but if she had more time, if she was writing a book about it, I'm sure she would be a little bit more in depth about this. But the real thing here is, if you are giving and you are not creating certain boundaries, and it's opposite of what you feel like inside, then you're acting out of trauma, and that's where it's difficult. Some people want to give all the time, and that is their boundary. That's who they are as a person. Let's continue.
Boundary is toward our own incessant, insatiable desire to please, to be the givers. It's that persona against which we need to create a boundary. It's our own internal battle. The boundary is within. Then it gets manifested without. And ultimately, it all boils down to worth, self-worth, treating yourself with dignity and being authentic.
And that's it. And I agree with that. You want to be authentic. To be authentic for some people means to be givers. It means that, what she said, incessant, insatiable need to give. That's okay. You may be super traded for that. As long as it's not being abusive or abusive to you, I wouldn't say that being a caregiver is, a persona. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. I can take my mother, for example. In her high school yearbook, they write, like, what do you want to be in life, or where do you want to be in 10 years? She said, I want to be a mother. And that was it. And then when she died, that was the same thing. Before she died, like, her last words to me were, some people may think that I didn't live like a great life, but I was a mother and I raised 2 children, which is really all I wanted. So again, how could you deny that? I would never deny that. She got her self-worth from being a mother, from those caregiving, nurturing roles, or being supportive. Well, I mean, my parents got divorced, but she was supportive with me and my sister. And listen, she's probably more happy than I ever was when I graduated school or I did something successful at work. She had more happiness than I did, probably, because that was just her way and her thing. So I hope that helps out. I think I could do some more shows on boundaries because it's really, really an important subject, and it's very complicated and in depth. So I hope you like that. And I'm looking at here. Yeah, if you're interested, go to Dr.Shefali.com. I know she has a couple of books. I don't know the names of them off the top of my head. I think one of them is Something Awakening. But either way, I haven't read it, but I know who she is and I like her work, so I would suggest that. Anyway, this is the Rise Above Project. I hope you found some value in it. And if you want, tell a friend, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.